Well, in this video clip we're going to go ahead and make a broth, and in making a broth you need several ingredients. The main ingredient, other than water, is the meat, or in this case it's a chicken, a poultry. It's a roasting chicken. It's about 8 pounds. You could use a smaller chicken, 3.5 to 4 pound. Whenever I go to make this broth with this chicken, I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half just to speed up the cooking time. In addition to the chicken with the bones and the meat on here, I'm also going to go ahead and use the gizzard, the heart. They pack the neck along with it. Sometimes they do have it, sometimes they don't. The one thing I am going to get rid of, though, is the liver. The liver will end up clouding the stock and overpowering the flavor of it. The next ingredient in making a broth is the vegetables. On these vegetables, this is a classic arrangement of vegetables. It's carrot, celery, and onion. The old classic combination, they had a lot more vegetables in it, but nowadays they've pretty streamlined it down to what they call mirepoix. And what they go by when they use mirepoix is ratios, and the ratio for mirepoix is 50% onion, 25% celery, and 25% carrot. The third ingredient in making a chicken broth is the aromatics, and in this case it's a classic aromatic mix. It's whole black peppercorns, stems of parsley, not the green leaves because they'll just end up clouding the stock and of course turning it green. Bay leaves, in this case I have dried, you could use fresh if you want, and thyme. I have fresh thyme here, but here again you can use dried. Just remember that when you're using the herbs, that if you use dried, that you want to use about 1/3 the amount. Now this is called a sachet, and the reason it's called a sachet is because they usually take a piece of cheesecloth and they wrap it up in the cheesecloth and then submerge it into the liquid whenever it's cooking. In this case we're making a broth and it's all going to be strained out in the end, so it doesn't make sense to use the cheesecloth, to waste the cheesecloth and to waste your time. If I was making a soup with this, directly with a soup, that the chicken was going to be part of it, I wasn't going to be straining anything out, then I would go ahead and wrap it in that cheesecloth. That way I could take it out later on. The next and final ingredient in a basic broth is, of course, water, and in this case it's cold water. Cold water tends to pull more of the flavor out. If you were to use hot water, you would coagulate or stiffen the protein in the bones and in the meat itself as soon as you put it in there, and you wouldn't extract as much flavor. I said that these 4 basic components, of course along with the gizzard and stuff, but some textbooks tell you not to use salt, but in my case I agree with that, because this is a base flavoring liquid into something else that you're going to make. In this case I'm going to end up making a soup with it, but I can make a sauce too. I'm going to probably reduce that down, and if I add too much salt it's going to get salty. So what I like to do is just take about a pinch or so and go ahead and throw it into the water. It helps to extract. It does add a little bit of flavor, but the main purpose here is to help extract that flavor out of the bones and out of the meat. Now we're making a broth. The difference between a broth and a stock is only in this right here. Stock has just bones. Broth has the meat included too. A lot of people just make stock nowadays because it's versatile. They can use it for a lot of different things. The one thing that I'm going to make with this is a chicken soup, so I'm going to go ahead and cook the chicken in it and pull the meat off later and use that as an ingredient. Let's go ahead and start by finishing up some of these vegetables that I have here. I'm cutting the size on them to about a medium rough chop. And I have, if you remember the proportions I told you, 50%, 25-25. There's about half the amount of celery and carrot as there's going to be onion. I could leave the skins on the onion. In this preparation I want a lighter broth, so I'm going to go ahead and take the skins off. But I can use it for something else. I can use it in another stock, maybe a darker stock that I want to get that color from the skins. It also gives a nice flavor too. So go ahead and trim those up, take all the skin off, save it, and then do what we call again a rough chop. Now, why do we size them this way? Well, if you cut them too small, they end up dissolving into the broth or the stock that you're making, and you end up clouding the stock. So by cutting them a little bit bigger, they tend to hold their shape and they won't mush out as fast and cloud it up. This, I already had some pre-cut carrot laying around, so I went ahead and used it, but if you want to use whole carrots, that's fine. That's usually the method that we use. As far as peeling the carrot, as long as it's clean, it's fine. You're going to be taking it out in the end anyways, so there's really no need to peel it. That's where a lot of vitamins and minerals and nutrients are anyways, so it's a good idea to keep them on. But in this case, sliced vegetable that I had already, I'm going to go ahead and use. As you see here, about 50, 25, 25. Now, if you want to get specific, you could go textbook and say for about 5 to 6 pounds of bones, I have about a gallon and a half of water and about a pound of mirepoix. And that's pretty much the ratios that I have here. About a pound of mirepoix, I'm going to go ahead and put in. I'm looking to get in the end about a gallon of broth. So I'm going to have evaporation on the stove whenever I'm cooking. I want to go ahead and add in about a quart or two extra, so whenever it's simmering and that water's evaporating, I end up with a yield of about a gallon. Sachet, the amounts that I'm going to need for that, they vary across the board. I would suggest that if you're in the habit of making several of these, that you follow the textbook as far as a dozen or so peppercorns per gallon, a couple parsley stems, a couple bay leaves, and a couple sprigs of thyme. Down the road, if you feel like you're not getting enough flavor, it's supposed to just enhance the flavor of the broth. It's not supposed to be out there in your face. So you're going to be adding other things anyways later on for a final ingredient when you make the soup. So this is just a subtle background that you're going to have. And the same thing applies to the vegetable too. It's a subtle background that gives you depth in the broth that you're making. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and take this chicken and cut it in half. I could cut it any number of ways. Remember, this is mainly for flavor. As far as the bones are concerned, the meat I'm going to be taking off later on and using it in my soup that I'm making. Really great flavor in the backbone here. You have a lot of gelatin that lies in those bones, and that's going to give me good flavor and structure to my broth. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get cleaned up here, and I'll go ahead and start making the broth. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add everything together, and it's as simple as it sounds. It's just basically putting everything in the pot. I like to put the water in last, just because it's going to, if I throw the chicken and vegetables in, it's going to splash everywhere. But I'm just going to go ahead and put the chicken in. Remember, all that meat that's there, the breast meat, the leg meat, the thigh, the wing, that's all going to be pulled off later on. My gizzard, my heart, the neck, I'm going to go ahead and throw the vegetables in. I can keep them from flying all over the place. I'm going to throw my aromatics in. I'm going to go ahead and put my water in now, and the water has that little bit of salt in it. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more water into this, and then we'll go ahead and get it on the stove. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the water that I need and go ahead and get it on the stove. Now, I didn't get as much water as I wanted into that pot, but what I can do is, as the broth comes to a simmer or comes to a boil and I turn it down to a light simmer, I'm going to go ahead and add more water. That point, you can go ahead and add hot water to it. It makes a big difference in the beginning, but once you have the broth simmering, then you can go ahead and add hot water to replenish as it's cooking.